Bantam Audio Publishing presents The Trail to Peachmeadow Canyon by Louis L'Amour. Mr. Louis L'Amour.
Anybody who has flown over the Colorado Canyon or that area, particularly the area in the upper canyon where the Little Colorado joins it, knows how many canyons there are out there. You fly over this great mass of canyons branching off the Grand Canyon, and it seems like there must be 1 million of them down there. Actually, there are thousands, and most of them have not been explored. In some of those canyons, they found peaches and apricots growing. Now, how these got there, I don't know. Maybe they were native to the country. More likely they were planted by some of the early Indians who got the seeds from the Spanish, perhaps in New Mexico, and took them back there and planted them. Maybe they were planted by birds dropping the seeds. It's very difficult to tell, but they're there. And I wrote the story of Peachmeadow Canyon, telling about one of those canyons, which was a hideout for outlaws. There was no organization of outlaws, just like I wrote about in The Trail to Peachmeadow Canyon, for the simple reason that outlaws are not susceptible to organization. They're strong individuals, and they're apt to go off on their own, or 2 or 3 in a group, and it takes a lot of discipline and a very strong hand to control them at all. There have been a few cases where it was attempted, and sometimes successfully for a very short time, but always there's elements there that want to break off and leave and go on their own. There have been a few cases where it worked, but usually they were just loose groups that got together. The James Younger gang got together because they had known each other in the Civil War, with the Quantrill gang, and Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid and that group, it was very loosely organized. The so-called Wild Bunch, there were 5 or 6 that were the focal point of the group, and then occasionally they'd recruit somebody else or somebody else would join them, and there might be 7 or 8 at a time, but usually it was an interchangeable group of 5 or 6. Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid themselves, and Harvey Logan and Elza Lay, a few others. I had an uncle by marriage who lived out in that country, and he carried the mail for a while in Star Valley, Wyoming, which is in the western part of the state. And he knew Butch and that group very well. They at one time pulled a holdup where they got a lot of money, but none of the bills were signed. It was all brand new money, so it was no good to them at all. So they papered a saloon with it, just for a joke. And he had a few of those bills that they'd given him at one time. I saw one of them. Unhappily, I don't have one as a souvenir, which I'd like to have. But he also operated a ranch for a while for another man in further east in Wyoming, not too far from the Hole in the Wall. And Butch and that group used to ride across the back pasture going into the Hole in the Wall, which is a big, wide opening, incidentally, not the little narrow one like people think. The Hole in the Wall is a wall that's about 35, 40 miles long of sandstone. And there's only one opening in it. And this opening is a few hundred yards wide, and the stream runs through it. But one good man with a rifle could sit up there and keep anybody from coming through. Some of the crimes, not stage holdups so much, but train holdups, were pretty carefully planned. And the planning in the case of Butch Cassidy and Sundance Kid, his group was the most successful group. I think Butch did most of the planning there himself with the aid of Elza Lay, who was a very bright young man, had been a school teacher for a while, in fact. And I think they did actually most of the planning, probably with input from all of them. But he very rarely had more than 5 or 6 in a group when he did something, sometimes only 3. One of the best-known crimes is the robbery of a payroll at Castlegate, Utah. Butch Cassidy was there, and I believe Elza Lay. I've forgotten who all 3 of them were, maybe Harvey Logan. But in any event, 3 of the men decided they were going to pull this holdup at Castlegate, Utah. And the payroll was coming in on the train, carried by messenger. And when he got off the train, they were going to catch him there and take the gold from him, or the money from him, and get away with it. And they did. And some of the crimes were planned very carefully, some not at all. Some were done on the spur of the moment. But usually robbing a bank or something like took a good deal of planning, because you had to have a man to hold your horses in a place where they could be held out of sight, and you had tried to pick a time when there were not too many people in the bank. They called for a certain amount of planning. Butch Cassidy did most of that.
And now, The Trail to Peachmeadow Canyon. Winter snows were melting in the forests of the Kaibab, and the red and orange hue of the 1,000-foot Vermilion Cliffs was streaked with the dampness of melting frost. Deer were feeding in the forest glades among the stands of ponderosa and fir, and the trout were leaping in the streams. Where sunlight trailed through the webbed overhang of the leaves, the water danced and sparkled. 5 deer were feeding on the grass along a mountain stream back of Finger Butte, their coats mottled by the light and shadow of the sun shining through the trees. A vague something moved in the woods behind them, and the 5-pronged buck lifted his regal head and stared curiously about. He turned his nose into the wind, reading it cautiously, but his trust was betrayal, for the movement was downwind of him. The movement came again, and a young man stepped from concealment behind a huge fir not 20 feet from the nearest deer. He was straight and tall in gray fringed buckskins, and he wore no hat. His hair was thick, black, and wavy, growing full over the temples, and his face was lean and brown. Smiling, he walked toward the deer with quick, lithe strides, and had taken 3 full steps before some tiny sound betrayed him. The buck's head came up and swung around, and then with a startled snort it sprang away, the others following. Mike Bastian stood grinning, his hands on his hips. "Well, what do you think now, Roundy?" he called. "Could your Apache beat that? I could have touched him if I jumped after him." Rance Roundy came out of the trees, a lean, wiry old man with a gray mustache and blue eyes that were still bright with an alert awareness. "Now, I'll be darned if any Apache ever lived as could beat that," he chortled. "Not a mite of it. I never seen the day I could beat it either. You're a caution, Mike, you sure are. I'm glad you're not sneaking up after my hair." He drew his pipe from his pocket and started stoking it with tobacco. "We're going back to Toadstool Canyon, Mike. Your dad sent for us." Bastian looked up quickly. "Is there trouble? Is that it?" "No, he only wants to talk with you. Maybe—" Roundy was cautious. "He figures it's time you went out on a job. One of those rides." "I think that's it," Mike nodded. "He said in the spring, and it's about time for the first ride. I wonder where they'll go this time." "No telling. The deal will be well planned, though. That dad of yours would have made a fine general, Mike. He's got the head for it, he sure has. Never forgets a thing, that one. You've been with him a long time, haven't you?" "Sure, since before he found you. I knowed him in Mexico in the war, and that was longer ago than I like to think. I was a boy then, my own self." "Son," Roundy said suddenly, "look." He tossed a huge pine cone into the air, a big one at least 9 inches long. With a flash of movement, Mike Bastian palmed his gun, and almost as soon as it hit his hand, it belched flame, and again. The second shot spattered the cone into a bunch of flying brown chips. "Not bad," Roundy nodded. "You still shoot too quick, though. You gotta get over that, Mike. Sometimes one shot is all you'll ever get." Side by side, the two walked through the trees, the earth spongy with a thick blanket of pine needles. Roundy was not as tall as Mike, but he walked with the long, springy stride of the woodsman. He smoked in silence for some distance, and then he spoke up. "Mike, if Ben's ready for you to go out, what'll you do?" For 2 steps, Bastian said nothing. Then he spoke slowly. "Why, go, I guess. What else?" "You sure? You sure you want to be an outlaw?" "That's what I was raised for, isn't it?" There was some bitterness in Mike's voice. "Somebody to take over what Ben Curry started?" "Yeah, that's what you were raised for, all right. But this you want to remember, Mike. It's your life. Ben Curry, for all his power, can't live it for you. Moreover, times have changed since Ben and me rode into this country. It ain't free and wild like it was, because folks are coming in, settling it up, making homes. Getting away won't be so easy, and your pards will change too. In fact, they already have changed." "When Ben and me come into this country," Roundy continued, "it was every man for himself. More than one harum-scarum fella who's otherwise all right got himself the name of an outlaw. Nobody figured much about it then. We rustled cows, but so did half the big ranches of the West. And if a cowpoke got hard up and stopped a stage, nobody made much fuss, unless he killed somebody. They figured it was just..."
Sample complete. Ready to continue?